The number that should not be possible. You make $120,000 a year. You have $11,000 in savings, and you have absolutely no idea how that happened. Not because you were reckless, not because you gambled, not because you did anything that would show up on a highlight reel of bad decisions. You did what you were supposed to do. You showed up, you worked hard, you got the raises, you bought the house, you drive a car that matches your title. You look, from the outside, like someone who has figured it out. But at night, when it is quiet and the phone is down and there is nothing left to distract you, there is a number you do not want to look at. It lives in an account you barely check. And every month that passes without you checking it feels like a small mercy, because checking it would mean admitting something you are not quite ready to admit. That feeling has a name. I call it the high earner illusion, and it is one of the most quietly destructive forces in American financial life. Not because it makes you broke in the obvious way, but because it makes you feel safe while the clock runs out underneath you. Here is what I want you to understand by the time this video is over. By the time you finish watching, you will stop confusing income with wealth, and that one shift will change every financial decision you make from this point forward. Because right now, most of what you call financial progress is actually financial motion. You are moving, but you are not building. And at 45, that distinction becomes the difference between finishing strong and finishing desperate. I spend most of my time thinking about the gap between what high-earning Americans earn and what they actually keep. And the thing I keep coming back to is this: the people who end up financially cornered are almost never the people you expect. They are not the reckless ones. They are not the uneducated ones. They are the disciplined, hardworking, responsible people who trusted a story they were never supposed to examine too closely. If you earn good money, try to do the right thing, but still feel like retirement is a vague plan you will figure out when things calm down. Stay with me, because things are not going to calm down. And what I am about to show you changes everything. Before we get to the math, I want to take you somewhere. Not because history is a hobby of mine, but because the pattern I am about to describe has been running so long it has a paper trail you can actually follow. In 1862, the United States government passed a law called the Homestead Act. On paper, it was one of the most generous things a government has ever done for its citizens. The deal was simple. If you were willing to move to the open land out west, claim 160 acres, and farm it for 5 years, the government would hand it to you free. No payment, no debt. Just show up and work, and the land is yours. Millions of families believed it. They packed everything they had, left behind what they knew, and headed toward a promise of ownership and stability. The idea of building something real, land with your name on it, a foundation for your children, was almost impossible to resist, and that is exactly what made it so effective. Here is the part nobody told them up front. The best land had already been purchased quietly by the railroad companies before ordinary families ever had a chance to apply. The land that was left, the land that was actually available through the Homestead Act, was often dry, rocky, and almost impossible to farm profitably. Many families spent everything they had on a plot of earth that could not support them. They worked for years on a promise that was technically true but practically designed to benefit someone else. I am not telling you this story because it is sad. I am telling you because you are living inside the same structure right now, and the version being sold to you today does not look like a land grant. It looks like a 401k with a 3% default contribution rate. It looks like an employer match you only partially capture. It looks like a retirement plan that technically exists, but is structured in a way that mostly benefits the institution managing your money, not you. The promise is real, the access is real, but the design was never built with your outcome as the priority. And understanding that is not cynicism, it is navigation. Now I want to tell you about two men. Both of them worked at the same company. Both of them earned about the same salary. Both of them did what they were told. Marcus was 45. He had worked at Sears Holdings for 19 years. He had started on the floor, worked his way into regional management, and by the time the company was stumbling publicly in the early 2010s, he had a pension promise, a retirement account with a healthy chunk of company stock, and a sense of identity that was genuinely tied to the brand. He wore the badge like it meant something, because for almost 2 decades it had. Derek was also 45. He had worked at the same company for 12 years, same income bracket as Marcus, same general life situation, mortgage, 2 kids, a car payment he was almost done with. But Derek had made one different decision about 7 years earlier that neither of them had thought about much at the time. Derek had switched the bulk of his retirement contributions out of company stock and into a broad mix of different investments. Not because he was smarter than Marcus, not because he saw anything coming. He did it because his older sister had said something at Thanksgiving that stuck with him. Never let your paycheck and your retirement bet on the same horse. When Sears filed for bankruptcy in 2018, both men lost their jobs in the same week, but their financial situations were not even close to the same. Marcus lost his income and the majority of his retirement savings simultaneously. His company stock had been worth something meaningful the year before. By the time he could move it, it was worth almost nothing. The pension he had been promised was not fully guaranteed. He was 45 years old, starting over with very little runway and almost no financial cushion. Derek lost his job too. That part was the same. But his retirement account was still there because it was not tied to the fate of one company. He had the same problem. He needed a new job, but he did not have the additional crisis of rebuilding a financial foundation from scratch at the same time. Same company, same salary range, same age. One different decision made 7 years earlier. That is how concentrated risk works in the real world. It feels safe on the way up. It only reveals itself as danger when the floor gives out, and by then, the door is usually already locked. Now, you might be thinking, I do not have all my retirement money in company stock. Good. That specific mistake is not the point. The point is the pattern. When your financial future depends on one thing being true, one company staying healthy, one income stream continuing, one assumption holding, the system will let you believe that story right up until the moment you pay for it. This is where it gets really interesting, because what destroyed Marcus was not bad luck in isolation. It was the combination of bad luck and a mechanism he had been living inside for years without ever naming it. I call it the Income Mirage Trap. Here is how it works. It moves in 3 stages, and most people pass through all 3 without ever realizing what is happening to them. Stage 1 is the identity lock. When your income rises, your brain does not just register the number. It updates your identity. You do not just earn more. You become someone who earns more. And that identity, the car it drives, the neighborhood it lives in, the school district it chooses for the kids, the vacations it takes, the way it talks about money at dinner, has a cost. A monthly cost, a fixed, non-negotiable, automatically recurring cost. And the higher your income climbs, the more you build your life around the assumption that this income continues forever. You are not spending recklessly. You are spending proportionally. And that is exactly what makes it invisible. Stage 2 is the lifestyle lock. This is where every raise you receive gets absorbed by costs before you ever consciously decide to invest it. The mortgage on the slightly better neighborhood that made complete sense at the time, the car upgrade that was reasonable given what you were earning, the school tuitions, the club memberships, the insurance premiums, the subscriptions, all of them individually sensible, all of them together forming a floor that your income must continuously clear just to keep your life running. Economists call this lifestyle inflation, but I call it the system's second trap, because by the time you feel it, it is already built into your monthly bills. Stage 3 is the invisible deficit. This is the dangerous one. This is the one that never shows up on any statement. You are not in debt. Technically, you are not broke. But when you step back and look honestly at the rate your invested assets are actually growing versus the rate you are consuming your future financial options, you are running a quiet deficit. You are eating your retirement slowly every single month and calling it a normal life. Here is where the math stops being abstract. If you want to retire with enough to actually live on, not extravagantly, just securely, you need a pool of invested money large enough that you can live off a reasonable portion of it each year. A rough way to think about it is this. If your annual spending is around $60,000, you need a retirement portfolio in the range of $1.5 million to be reasonably secure through market swings, healthcare costs, and all the surprises that come after 65. Now, let us look at what it actually costs to get there depending on when you start building seriously. If you start investing consistently at 39 and your money grows at an average of 7% per year over the long run, you need to put in roughly $1,000 a month to reach $1 million by your late 60s. That is not a small number, but it is a manageable number, a number that fits inside a disciplined life without wrecking everything else. If you wait until 45, just 6 years later, that number jumps to about $1,700 a month. Not because 6 years is a long time in your life, but because those 6 years include some of the most powerful compounding years. The years where money you already invested starts multiplying on its own without you doing anything. When you cut that window short, you do not just lose time. You lose the multiplication. You lose the years where growth was going to do the heavy lifting for you. Wait until 50, and you are looking at something like $2,800 a month. Wait until 55, and you are close to $4,500 a month. At that point, you are not building retirement. You are begging the math to forgive you. And the math does not have feelings. This is why 45 is the inflection point. It is the last age where the monthly number still fits inside a real budget without requiring you to sacrifice your entire present life to fund your future one. After 45, the solution stops being mechanical and starts being emotional. It stops being a system and starts being a punishment. And no one sustains punishment, level sacrifice for 15 straight years. That is not a character flaw. That is just how human beings work. Now, here is the part most financial content never touches, because it requires looking at something uncomfortable. When you delay, when you accept the default contribution rate, when you keep your retirement account in expensive funds and never look at the settings, when you cash it out between jobs and tell yourself you will rebuild it later, someone benefits from all of that, and it is not you. The companies that manage your retirement plan get paid based on how much money is sitting inside the system. Not based on whether your outcome is good, not based on whether you retire comfortably, based on the total amount they are managing. So they have no financial reason to push you toward higher contributions. A 3% contribution rate keeps you in the system. That is all they need. Lenders benefit when your fixed monthly costs grow faster than your savings because you become permanently dependent on credit to handle any interruption in income. You are not a risky borrower to them. You are an ideal one high income, real financial exposure, and a lifestyle that requires your paycheck to keep arriving. And the entire consumer economy benefits every single time your income rises, and you immediately upgrade your life to match it because you become a fresh market for a slightly more expensive version of everything you already own. None of this is a conspiracy. These systems are simply working exactly as designed. And the design does not require you to win. It requires you to participate. That is a very different relationship, one that functions perfectly in their favor, whether or not it ever works in yours. They sustain this through 3 quiet tactics. The first is defaults, low starting contribution rates and complicated account settings that require real effort to change, so most people simply never do. The second is complexity. So many investment options, so many technical terms, so much fine print that you feel genuinely unqualified to make a confident choice, so you defer to whatever the plan already picked for you. The third is what I call normalization of leakage, making it feel completely normal to borrow from your retirement account, to cash it out when you switch jobs, to treat it like a backup savings account when things get tight. Once you break that seal, retirement stops being something protected. It becomes negotiable. And once it is negotiable, it is almost always negotiated against your future self. There is one more layer I want you to sit with before we talk about what to actually do, because understanding the mechanism intellectually is not enough. The reason smart, high-earning, responsible people still end up behind is not that they do not understand how compound growth works. It is that retirement requires you to emotionally care about a person you have never met. Your future self. And your brain, if we are being honest about how it actually operates, treats your future self like a stranger. Not like you, like someone you might pass in a parking lot someday, vaguely recognizable but not your responsibility right now, and it becomes incredibly easy to steal from a stranger. You steal from your future self every time you inflate your lifestyle without adjusting your savings rate. You steal from him every time you accept the default contribution, because increasing it would make your paycheck look smaller today. You steal from him every time you tell yourself that you will fix this later, when the kids are through school, when the mortgage gets smaller, when the raise finally comes through. Later is not a time on the calendar. Later is a story your present self tells to avoid making a real trade-off today. And the cruelest part of that story is that the longer you tell it, the more expensive the moment of truth becomes when you finally have to face it. Marcus told that story for 19 years, and when the floor gave out under him, there was no later left. Once you see the income mirage trap clearly, once you understand that your income has been telling you a story about security that your actual savings rate does not support, the path forward is not complicated. It is uncomfortable in places, but it is not complicated. The first thing you need to do is find 3 numbers, not your account balance from last quarter, not what the market did this month. Those are distraction numbers. The numbers that actually matter are your real annual spending, not your income, your spending. Because retirement replaces spending, not income. Your total invested retirement assets right now, meaning actual invested money, not your home equity, not your car, not anything that has to be sold to convert into cash, and your current savings rate as a percentage of your total income. Write those 3 numbers down in the same place at the same time. Most people have never done this. The reason they have not is because putting all 3 together makes the gap between where you are and where you need to be impossible to ignore. Once you have those numbers, do one calculation that almost nobody does. Take your annual spending and multiply it by 25. That gives you a rough target for the total portfolio you need to retire without depending on luck or a perfect economy. If you spend $60,000 a year, your target is around $1.5 million. Subtract your current invested assets from that number. What remains is your gap, and your entire job from this point forward is not to feel bad about the size of that gap. It is to close it at a pace that is fast enough to matter and sustainable enough to last for the next 2 decades. The next move is to open your retirement account today, not this week, today, and look for one specific feature: automatic escalation. This is a setting that many plans offer, which automatically increases your contribution percentage once a year without requiring you to make a new decision. If your plan has it, turn it on right now and set it to increase by 1 or 2% each year. Here is why this matters more than it sounds. The hardest part of saving more is not the money. It is the decision. Every time you have to actively choose to give up more of your paycheck, your brain will fight you. It will find 12 reasonable arguments for why this particular month is not the right time to increase. Automatic escalation removes that fight entirely. You stop negotiating with yourself every year. The system quietly negotiates on your behalf in your favor while your lifestyle adjusts around the new number without the emotional drama of having chosen it. After that, look at your fees, not your performance. Your fees, a difference of just 1% in annual fees, is not a rounding error over 25 years. It is tens of thousands of dollars that bleed silently out of your account year after year while you are paying attention to everything else. Most people will spend an entire afternoon negotiating the price of a car to save $2,000, and they will never spend 20 minutes checking whether their retirement money is being quietly eroded by high-cost funds they never consciously chose. If you are in expensive funds, switching to simple, low-cost options that track the broad market is not a complicated financial strategy. It is the move that the most sophisticated investors in the world have been making for decades. The expensive version just happened to come with extra complexity, added to justify the extra cost. And if you have old retirement accounts sitting forgotten in plans from jobs you left years ago, bring them together not for any advanced financial reason. Simply because clarity is what makes management possible. An account you forgot exists is an account you are not growing with any intention. And intention, at this stage, is everything. The salary does not determine your freedom. The gap between what you earn and what you need to sustain your life. That is the number. The salary does not determine your freedom. The gap is the number, and 45 is the last age where closing that gap is still calm, systematic, boring work, instead of frantic, life-altering desperation. If any part of this hit something real in you, not excitement, but recognition, the quiet feeling of something landing that you already knew somewhere but had not let yourself name, then the most important move is not to find a more sophisticated strategy. It is to stop waiting for a better moment. Open the account today. Write down the 3 numbers, turn on the escalation, and check the fees. Do the boring work right now while the boring work is still affordable. Because the version of this where you wait 3 more years is not the same version. The monthly number is higher. The margin for error is smaller. The story you have to tell yourself to justify the delay gets harder and harder to believe. If this video helped you see something you had not been able to see clearly before, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. The best time to build this system was 6 years ago. The second best time is right now today, before this tab is closed and the moment passes. The most dangerous financial story is not the one the market tells you about risk and reward. It is the one you tell yourself, that there is still time to figure this out later, when things are calmer, when the picture is clearer, when the moment finally feels right. The man you are going to be at 65 is being built right now, not in the dramatic moments, in the quiet ones, and whether you open the account today or close this video and tell yourself you will get to it soon. That is not a number. That is not a strategy. That is the whole point.